Oh, hey, my friends. Welcome to Word Made Digital, Season 2, Episode 3. I'm your host, Joanna. I'm so glad that you're joining us for the podcast. I hope you have been catching up on some previous episodes. If you have missed a couple, maybe this season, or maybe you haven't even heard some of the episodes from Season 1, go on back, check them out. I think you're going to love it. But on today's episode, I'm really excited because we have author and podcaster Emily P. Freeman. Amongst many things, she is a writer of best-selling books. Emily hosts also the Next Right Thing podcast. It has over 2.5 million downloads, so I'm guessing a ton of you have listened to her podcast. Maybe that's even why you've come to this podcast, because you want to hear our conversation. If you haven't read her books, maybe you know her podcast, particularly because she's sort of this part spiritual director, part soothing voice to boost your prayer time in your devotionals every morning or every week when these episodes come out. And then partly she also feels kind of like a life coach, helping you making life decisions, making you figure out what the next right thing is in your life. So we're talking today, Emily and I, about creative writing and how to turn your writing from not just being a creative outlet, but actually be something that gets published, to turn your writing into business. And then how to figure out what the next right thing is in your own life. So thanks so much to our Season 2 sponsor. That's, of course, Wycliffe College. Wycliffe is an evangelical graduate school of theology located at the University of Toronto. I completed a Master's of Theological Studies at Wycliffe. And so this allowed me to take a wide range of courses in biblical and theological knowledge, but also some really practical life and ministry skills and leadership and pastoral care, evangelism, and much more. Actually, one of my favorite courses was C.S. Lewis and evangelism. And actually, on an upcoming episode, I've recently just recorded an interview with the prof I had from that course. And we're going to be looking into the creative mind of C.S. Lewis on a future episode with this course's professor. His name is John Bowen. And we're going to explore this world of Narnia and Aslan and the wardrobe and how this creative work points us to Christ. Another course that I loved at Wycliffe, though, when I was there, I actually had an opportunity to go to Israel and earn credit for it. It was this amazing trip where we went for 2 weeks, explored these real biblical sites. We did some writing on it, and we did lectures on location in the places, in these biblical historic places. It was a really life-changing experience. So these courses, they gave me all kinds of things that I use, tools and equipment that I use in really my day-to-day life and in my ministry. And even, it probably comes out subtly even in this podcast as I talk to people that I'm interviewing. And so I love my time at Wycliffe. If you want to know more about Wycliffe, or you want to know more about how it impacted me, there's a special interview that they published on their website just for you listeners of the podcast. So it's wycliffecollege.ca/wordmadedigital. And I'm going to link that down in the show notes. But I want you to go check it out. Read a bit of the interview, click around on the site, and see if there's something there for you. All right, here is my interview with Emily P. Freeman.
Welcome to the Word Made Digital podcast with Joanna LaFleur. You're listening to Season 2, sponsored by Wycliffe College. Word Made Digital brings you interviews with brilliant Christian creatives and communicators to inspire, challenge, and equip you in your own work. The church carries the best news in the world, so we want to help you be the best creatives and communicators in the world. Here we go.
Well, hi, Emily. Thanks so much for joining me on the podcast today. I'm so glad to meet you.
I'm glad to meet you too. Thanks for having me.
Oh man, it's so fun to have a conversation with you because, well, people in my world are quoting you and passing around episodes of your podcast to one another, and so it's fun to actually be able to ask some of the questions that we probably have had of you as we've been getting in touch with your content, your writing, your work, your podcast. So tell us a little bit about yourself for people who don't know you. Who are you? What's your work?
Yeah, well, I'm a mom and a wife and a writer. I'm a podcast host. My husband, John, and I have been married for about 17 years, and we have 3 kids, twin girls who are 15, and then our son is 12, so we're kind of like doing the thing, parenting the teens, which is really fun. My husband was a youth pastor for 12 years, and so we sort of lived that life, and now it's weird to now be on the other side as the parent.
Oh, yeah.
Because for so long we were like, had the little kids, and now we have the big kids.
Yeah.
So that's kind of our home life. And then I also love working as a writer. I've written 5 books now, and also host the Next Right Thing podcast only for about the last year and a half, as if I've been doing that. And then I'm also the co-founder of an online membership community called Hope Writers that we've run for about 3.5 years now, where we help writers pivot from writing in secret to writing for a reader. So that's all of those things kind of integrate all into kind of where I hang out, which is at the corner and intersection of faith and creativity, which is all the stuff I love to talk about. So all of those things kind of fit into one of those spaces. So I'm really grateful.
Yeah, well, and it's exactly why we wanted to be able to talk to you today, because it's this amazing intersection of writing and creativity. And I don't know if all writers would describe themselves or their work as quote unquote creative. I think a lot of people, we are creative even if we don't describe ourselves that way, but that is really a hallmark of what you do and how you describe your work. And so there's this quote that I love in your manifesto: art is what happens when we dare to move toward what makes us come alive. Tell us about that. Where has that come from in your life? Why has this become a mantra for you?
I think so often we tend to point to the outcome, to the song, to the painting, to the work that we create, and that's what we call art. And that's what we know traditionally, that's what we call is art. But as a believer who knows that we have been made in the image of a creative God, I think that the truest art happens on the level of our soul. And so when the art that God made, he calls us his poema or his poem. He doesn't say that we make poetry. He says that we are poetry. That's the word, the actual Greek word in the language that he used to describe us. And so whenever I think about that, then really it makes more sense that the truest art is what's happening as we are formed into the people who we were created to be. And then when we create something out of that, whether that be a painting or a podcast or a parenting moment, whatever comes out as a result of me becoming more fully myself, that's not the art. That is the evidence that art has happened on the level of my soul. And so that's kind of the distinction, that art is what happens when we move towards what makes us come alive.
And so do you think that a lot of people are struggling with an identity crisis, or, they're walking around impersonating somebody else and not maybe in touch with who they are?
I think a lot of us, when we live distracted lives and we don't know how to sort of bend our ear to the level of our lives and sort of when we don't understand how to do that or what that looks like, then it would make sense that we would then perhaps walk around trying to dance to the music that we can't quite hear, or try to mimic the steps of someone else who seems to be living a life that we want to have. And I think that we may feel like imposters. That's what that leads to. We aren't imposters, but that's how we feel when we're not aware of who we are and what we're made to be and who we really were created to be.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And I think that's perhaps in my mind why people are resonating with this podcast, the Next Right Thing podcast, that you began about 1.5 years ago. And it's just exploded, in my understanding, millions of downloads of this podcast. Why do you think it's connecting with people? Does that surprise you that so many people have found you on the podcast world?
Oh, it has been a total surprise. I thought when I created this podcast, I was sort of like, well, it might not work, but at least I will be doing the thing that's been niggling in the back. Sometimes it's like the art just tells you what it wants to be, and it is relentless, and it's not going to let go until you just try it. And so for me, success was doing it, was actually like learning the podcasting format and publishing my first couple of episodes. Like that was success to me because it was such a bother. It was like, I got to get this off my shoulders because I've been thinking about it for so long. And so, but the ultimate gift though was that people started listening and then responding to me. And, to the point where when I went to a book signing, like maybe 6 months out, no, it wasn't even 6 months. It was like 2 months after the podcast had come out. I had like a little book signing of books that I'd written a couple years ago. No one wanted a book. They just want to talk about podcasts. In fact, and I'm like, don't you want to sign? I have some books to sign, and a lot of them had the book already, but they were like, oh, the podcast, let's talk about that. Oh, wow. And I would have people have their cell phone and come and and hit record on their cell phone and say, "Will you just say words to me?" They wanted me to say words to them in their cell phones so they could play it later.
Oh,
I'm
my
like,
goodness.
"What do you want me to say?" But it did help me realize, like, oh, there's something to this. And I think what it is we are a generation of tired people, and we are looking for someone to convince us that it's okay to slow down. And then but we're also looking for some answers about, what am I doing? These decisions are hard. How do I know I'm making the right decisions? How do I know I'm making decisions that look like me? And how can I know for sure? And so this podcast, I think one reason why it's resonating, honestly, is because it's short. Every episode is between 7 and 18 minutes, somewhere in there. 18 is actually really long for one of my episodes. And I think that helps make it accessible, because you can just kind of hit play on your way to the grocery store, and maybe by the time you get there, it's done, so it's not a super long commitment. I think that's one thing. But I also do think there is something that we are craving as a group of people, maybe in our culture right now. At least I'm craving it, which is maybe someone to walk alongside and to help us slow a little bit, and to maybe hear the voice of God or our own voices in a way that perhaps we're not hearing in other spaces.
And I don't know you enough to know this side of you, because there's the art, and I know you talk about this with Hope Writers, which I'd like to dive into in a few minutes, but there's the art, and then there's the business of being creative.
Absolutely.
And so would you say that, for example, the format of the podcast being quite short, we're in an age actually now where there's a lot of long form podcasts. Mine is up to about an hour, which isn't super long compared to some podcasts that are going over 2, even 3 hours, and people are listening to the entire conversation. So from a strategic perspective, did you have a strategy to that when you said we're going to do 10 minutes kind of a thing, or did it just sort of happen out of what was overflowing out of you?
No, it was definitely strategic, because I knew what my life could support. And I knew that I couldn't do interviews, because that would then require me to sync up my schedule with someone else. And also it would require more on the editing end. And I do this podcast all myself. So I script, record, edit, add the music beds, upload to Libsyn, all the things. And so I knew that I wanted to be light on my feet. I do have an assistant, Tracy. She helps me with transcripts and show notes. But as far as like the actual tech of the podcast, if I was going to do it, I knew it had to be super accessible for me as a worker. And so that was a really conscious choice for me.
Yeah, well, and as you say, it's sort of part of the whole thing that you do and the message you're trying to bring, even with the new book that you have, The Next Right Thing, trying to make things more simple. What is manageable and achievable, setting yourself up to be successful and be able to do this in the long term, because it actually works with who you are, your personality, your skills, your timeline.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So what does it mean to you? You talk about being a soul minimalist. What does that mean?
Well, if you think about the word minimalism, I think most people probably know what that means, in life. I was listening to a podcast, a conversation between Joshua Becker and Tish Oxenreider. Joshua has a blog and several books on minimalism. His blog is called Becoming Minimalist. And as I was listening to their conversation, he was talking about how we always have input into our homes of all different things. The kids bring stuff home, we bring stuff home, input everywhere all the time. But we don't have a regular practice of output, which is why we have to, take up a whole weekend decluttering. And it's why we lose our mind when we're like, kids, everyone take a trash bag into your room and throw it all away. We have these moments because it's overload, right? It's like
so Marie Kondo. Have you seen any of these on Netflix?
I can't stop watching her. How she taps. She's tapping. She's waking books up. She's waking up clothing. She's blessing the house. It's unbelievable.
I know. She's this adorable little woman. She's so small and smiley and sweet, and
she gets so excited about the mess too. I love mess.
And some of these people she's working with are a hot mess,
Hot mess. It makes you feel better about your life sometimes.
Yeah, I know. That's probably why we watch. Yeah, so but then we look around and actually we do have so much. You're right.
Maybe it's better organized, or we just can't. We're blind to it. But I do think there's something to that. There's a reason why we're all watching Marie Kondo right now. It's because there's something really fascinating about seeing how other people live, but then also seeing the progress of the before and after. What happens when you consciously make some choices and declutter your home, and you're left with what you love. What would it look like to declutter on the level of our souls? Because the truth is, we always have input in our lives every single day. Conversations, arguments, stressors, deadlines, email, input everywhere all the time. But where are those spaces where we have regular output? And I would say I'm more likely to declutter my kitchen junk drawer than I am to consciously declutter on the level of my soul. It's a little bit scarier. It's a little bit more, it's disembodied. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. And so I'm learning practical ways to embody this idea of becoming a soul minimalist by engaging in practices of silence, stillness, and solitude. And I think those are the ways to practice letting go of what I no longer need for the journey that I'm on. And even to take the metaphor to Marie Kondo, she really does talk about, you have this sweater, it doesn't bring joy, let's thank it and let it go. And I think we can do that with some difficult goodbyes on the level of our soul, with some things that maybe didn't work out that we wished had worked out, a project that we tried that didn't get the numbers we thought it would get. And we are able to, rather than never take another risk again, instead of that, we can see what it is that it was. We can thank it for what it was, and then we can move forward without it because we no longer need that for our journey. What might it look like if we were in a regular practice of decluttering our soul? It would look like a life of soul minimalism.
Wow. Yeah, and it is intimidating to a lot of people because they have not been taught how to do it. Like there is a TV show where you can watch people clean up houses, or you see these hoarder shows on TV, and it makes you maybe feel a bit better about your own home if, you look at somebody else's mess. But it has been inspiring. The show has been inspiring people in 2019 to clean up their own home. But there's not a lot of maybe models we've seen of what that looks like. But yet at the same time, you see that in Jesus. And I know that's been one of the inspirations for even this approach of calling it the next right thing. Where are you seeing that in Jesus? I'm curious to see where you identify that in his story.
If you look to Jesus to learn how to make decisions, you might be sorely disappointed because he doesn't really have like a step-by-step, like, okay, when you're faced with a tough decision, here's what you do. But what we do see in him is a constant getting away with his Father. We do see in him waking up with an open agenda, because if you think about it says, and then they went on their way. And then what happens on the way becomes the agenda as he goes. But you never hear really scripture say like, and then Jesus woke up and that day he was going to heal the bleeding woman and then heal a woman and then let a little girl die, but he was going to bring her back to life. It just sort of, get the sense that it's almost like he was in on something. It was almost like he was living in a different realm. And it's because he was. And he lived in the kingdom of God. And in that kingdom, I really believe he woke up. And because he came to earth fully God, but also fully man, I think what that means in many ways is he released his right to know, to have the plan, and he released that into his Father's hands so that his next right thing was always in step with his Father. And he said, I do what I see my Father do. And so he just had to be in constant communication with his Father that way. And then he modeled that for example, when he met with the parents of the girl who had died, Jairus, and his wife, the really important official, and daughter had died, and then he brought her back to life. And then he's got these parents who are literally, can you imagine their faces leaning forward like, whatever this man says next, we will do, because he has healed our daughter. He's brought her back to life, literally. And he can tell us we'll do anything. So Jesus had this opportunity to tell these parents, and now the reason I have saved your daughter is because she is going to do these wonderful things with her life. You know what he says to those parents is, now give her something to eat. And that had a profound impact on me, both as a human, but also as a parent, is that, wow, Jesus doesn't always give. He doesn't give 5-year plans or even week-long plans. He gives the next right thing. And as the parents, I guarantee you, they went in there and made her something to eat because they now knew they could trust this advice from God, and that was what they did. And so I think those are a couple of ways where we see Jesus along the road walking and modeling a next right thing mindset as he lived his life with God.
Yeah,
and as God.
And so you're talking about this as a perspective as a parent. How does that play out in your home? I'm imagining, there's a lot of people who listen. I posted that I was going to be interviewing you today and just wanted to see if people in my own social media sphere would have any questions for you. And one of the things I got, it just made me laugh, was someone said, "Oh, could you get her to just read me a bedtime story every night? Can you just ask her if she's available to come over to my house? Could Emily just come and read to me?" But I would imagine if you actually do have access, your own children in your own home, the dynamic of living with you as their mom, and this is sort of your philosophy of life. How does that play out in real life with your own kids, your own family?
It's such a great question. Well, my kids they don't really want bedtime stories anymore. So
they're a bit too old, aren't they?
So that's out. Although I will say, at Advent, we had a couple of nights, not very many. We didn't do it the whole Advent, but we did do a few of the nights of the candles and reading together. I really enjoyed reading the scripture and the reading for that night's Advent. And they suffered through, their mom reading scripture to them. But I will tell you the most honest answer I can give, which is in this season, it's an interesting dynamic because I am in a super full, fairly busy season of life with having a book coming out and hosting Hope Writers. And we launch 3 times a year. We're gearing up for a launch. And then I'm also in grad school. And so the things that I teach are often the things that I have the most difficulty practicing because of the time it takes to teach it and to learn it. And so it's this very strange push and pull thing where I'm actually really having to practice a next right thing mindset, or I will have a panic attack. So
it's real.
Engaging. It's real. And I will, that on Mondays is when I do the podcast episodes. I script and record them on Mondays. And Mondays is a very interesting day for me. It's a sacred day. Everybody knows I don't do appointments on Mondays. I don't do calls on Mondays. This is podcast day. But it's also a very lonely day because I have to isolate myself that day. And it's a day of listening to God and knowing that even certain lines that I feel compelled, like, oh, that one doesn't sound right. But sometimes I'll second guess because I think that might be for someone. I might need to leave that line in there, even though I think it's kind of but I'm going to leave it in there because I just have a sense. It's like a spiritual embodied type of a thing of creating these episodes. But that's probably my most day of mindfulness, I guess, with, paying attention to, what's happening within me and how that relates to what's happening on the outside. And the rest of the week is like kind of here we go. But my husband is a big part of my stability these days, of having someone in life who can really help to do a lot of the things that I would absentmindedly forget to tend to, like washing the towels. He takes up a lot of that stuff right now. And, when he's in a busy season, many times I'm able to do that. So we do a lot of trading off, which is such a lifesaver.
Yeah, ebbs and flows within, And there's seasons for busyness and there's seasons for quiet. But, you're talking about you've done research and you have some stats and some research about decision making and what is the next right thing. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've learned in this research about decision making?
Well, the research is not super extensive, but I will say there is a statistic that's pretty much everywhere. This says adults make over 30,000, I think it might be over 35,000 decisions on the daily. And I think one of the numbers, and I'm not looking at it right now, but I think it was in the 14,000 of those decisions are about food. Study about the way we make decisions about food. And I was like, that cannot be true. It just seems
Do I want ketchup or mustard?
Right. There's one, and you think that just can't be right. But I have seen these numbers over and over again. And I think about how, a lot of those decisions are subconscious. I mean, we don't think about the fact that we're doing them. We're just doing them. However, when we add to those already thousands of decisions that we already make on the regular. When we add a big decision, a big life decision, like a vocational decision or a decision about our faith or our relationships, then things can quickly become really crowded on the inside. And because we're already managing the small decisions of daily life, when you add in the big ones and you're not in a regular practice of decluttering on the level of your soul, it can be difficult to make decisions, and we can become overwhelmed with decision fatigue, or we can have a sense of chronic hesitation, which I talk about.
Chronic hesitation, I love that. That's me.
Right. Like, oh, this is chronic, and I don't know what I want. And so it can be paralyzing, and so that's why I'm really excited about the concept of slowing down, clearing the decks, and having a regular practice of doing that, so that we can kind of move past those daily decisions and get down to what we're really trying to, directions we're trying to move in our lives.
Well, and I think of some creative type people. Steve Jobs was the sort of iconic person for this, but the capsule wardrobe or the wearing of the same clothes every day. I think it's easier for men than it would be for women to take that as a strategy to make. So as a coping strategy in a world of too many decisions, one less decision is he always would wear that black mock neck shirt and the blue jeans. That was just the thing he wore. He didn't want to think about anything. Is there anything like that you've done in your life around maybe in your eating patterns or your clothing or things that are normal parts of your day to minimize those decisions?
That's a great question. This is a silly one, but it's kind of been one of those things is, I used to keep, this is kind of dumb. I used to keep my makeup, like all the little things you do is you put on in the morning in a zipped up bag, and I'd take it with me. And if I had time when I got to the place, and there's something about putting your makeup on in a parking lot that makes you feel hurried. It makes you feel hurried and crazy and like a teenager, even if you're not feeling hurried. But it's don't do that. And so several years ago, I just assigned a place in my bathroom I got one of those things for forks and knives and spoons, the utensil boxes.
Yeah.
But instead, I assigned a place for all of my makeup in my bathroom. And there's something so sanity-saving about you have a home, this is where you belong, and this is where we put makeup on. And I don't even wear that much makeup, but just the fact that this is what I do. And there's something very routine about that's where it lives. It doesn't leave that space. And this is where I do this activity. And so coming up with as many of those as I can is really helpful, I will say.
Oh, I love that. It's so practical, but we can maybe making one big decision like that leads to having to make less decisions later.
So true.
Yeah. And so what's a piece of advice you'd give to people who are struggling with making a big decision? Most of us in our mind will think of a major decision or something that we've maybe just made a decision about, but we're not sure was it the right decision. What's some advice you'd give to people?
Well, I think one advice I would say is, especially if you're looking towards a decision that you haven't yet made, is to ditch the pro-con list. I think pro-con lists are helpful to get your thoughts out, but know that one reason why they don't always work is because every line item does not weigh the same amount. Because, you might have one thing on the pro list and a million things on the con, but if the pro list item is like your health or something really huge, then that's going to outweigh all the cons, and now you're back to the square one. But I would recommend a different kind of list, and it might feel counterintuitive and it takes a little more time. But the most important list, if you ask me, is what I call a life energy list. And it's where you look at your life, you choose a certain period of time, a very specific period of time like this summer or, this last month, and then you choose a category. So let's say and I would say it would be most helpful if you're trying to make a decision, use the category that decision. So if you're trying to make a schooling decision for your kids or you're trying to make a work decision, choose the category, that category, and then make 2 lists. The first list is, what was life draining for me in this period of time, in this category? How can I list things that, what can I put down that was life draining, that just kind of stole the fun or the energy or the joy? And then the second part of that list is, what was life giving in this period of time, in this category for me? And you make your list there. I promise you something will stand out that you knew subconsciously or way down beneath the soul clutter. But until you put it down on paper, and I would recommend you make an actual list. It can be on your phone. also on paper, but don't just do it in your head because it's more difficult to hang on to. It's already sort of a weird practice, so to write it down helps make it a little bit more normal because we know how to make a list. I would also recommend you end with the life-giving list rather than the draining. Ask me how I know. Did it the opposite way. It's not nearly as fun. And so then you have some data to look at. And now, granted, it might be data based on intuition. It might be data based on emotion. But I would say that we make our best decisions when we integrate our mind, our intuition, and our heart. And so I think we all lead with one or the other, but I think we make our best decisions when we involve our whole soul, that wholeheartedness of mind, will, and emotion all together. And we see that on an actual, factual, black and white piece of paper. And then we can say, oh, this might actually inform this big decision I'm trying to make, because why am I trying to decide to do XYZ when XYZ has historically made me want to bang my head against the wall? And we might not see it that way because we haven't thought of it in terms of, does this make me rise, or does this kind of make me sink and fall a little bit in my body? And so looking at it that way can sometimes help us make those decisions a little bit more easily, because we see how they actually are impacting our everyday lives and our experience of living.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, it's so practical, but it's something that a lot of us don't. As we said, we don't have a model or an exercise of the way to do decision making in a healthy way for our soul.
That's right.
So I want to pivot for a minute, because we've been talking around it, but we haven't talked about it. Hope writers. I'm curious about this. I've more recently discovered this through a friend of mine who is telling me about it. Tell us about hope writers. What is this? Who is it for? What are people learning out of it?
Yeah, so Hope Writers we're a community of working writers, and we're dedicated to the success and creativity of each member. We started this about 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago, and it's really the group that I wish I had had when I first started writing books. You know, you first start out and you think, I might want to write a book, and you try to learn what you can by Googling things, and you get information, but it's from all different sources, and you don't ever know if they're trustworthy. You don't really know if it's going to apply to your thing you're trying to do. And so what Hope Writers does is it provides several things. One is training. So each week we have a live workshop for 1 hour live every week, and Hope Writers can watch it live, or we keep it in our member library so they can watch the recording. And those are, I host them, and those are with a professional in the industry. So we've had editors, agents, we've had lots of authors, marketing professionals, copyright experts, and they come in and we ask them all the questions, and our Hope Writers can ask questions live, and I try to be the host that asks the questions that I know the writers are wanting to know. And so that's sort of one aspect of it. We also divide up our member library into 6 stages, because what we have found over 3 years of doing this is that writers quit not because they no longer have anything to say. They quit because they become overwhelmed with a lot of times knowing what the path is, knowing the next right step. It comes back around. And also they become overwhelmed thinking they have to be everywhere at once with social media. And then finally they quit because they're not making any money. And so we really want to help writers move from writing as a hobby to writing alone really is for hobbyists. And if that's all you want to do and write, go for it. But we're really looking to work with those writers who want to pivot from writing in secret to writing for a reader, and what it actually takes in 2019 to write for a reader and to connect with a reader in ways that both feel like you, and that you can write meaningful words without sacrificing your meaningful life, but also understanding that if you want to know about writing, we're talking about art. If you want to know about publishing, we're talking about business. And writers who do well are the ones who know how to integrate both of these aspects of being a working writer. And that's really what we try to teach inside Hope Writers.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly it. People who love to write are often not good at the business. It's the same in, people who dream of their band making it big, or people who are visual artists, they're painters or something, and they have this amazing skill, but they have not a clue how to sell a painting.
That's right.
It's the same in every category. It's a different kind of skill, and it doesn't have to be ugly or we can learn the way to do it as ourselves and as our authentic selves, I think. But, do you think today there is space for more writers? I feel like everybody's coming out with a book, or it feels like everybody wants to be a writer, and there's a world of self-publishing as well, where in some ways it can feel oversaturated. Do you think there's still space for good new writers in 2019?
If the day we stop having new writers is a world I don't want to live in. I'm telling you, we always need new voices saying old things over and over again. And one thing I hear from writers all the time is, well, everything's already been said. It's like, yeah, everything's been said, but man, we need people to keep on saying it, because I think we're not really looking for new. We're looking for true. And if someone can show up and give me something true that resonates with me in maybe a little different way than I haven't yet heard, then I am here for that. And I just think there might be a lot of reasons why a person might not want to write, but don't ever let fear be one of them. I think that's what holds a lot of us back. Fear is never a good reason to not do or to do anything. So if you're talking about making decisions, fear is never a decision, is never a motivator of a decision. But another thing is, when we talk about art, art is what happens when you do what makes you come most fully alive. Do we need another book? Do we need another song? Do we need another painting? I mean, I don't know. Maybe we don't, but here's what we need. We need people who are willing to dig deep and to discover what makes them come alive so that they can show up at the table fully themselves. That's what we need in this world. Every person needs to have a space at the table. And if writing is the thing that helps them access who they really are, then let me tell you what, you better get to writing, because we need you to show up in your corner of the world. There are people that you have access to that nobody else has access to.
Right.
And that is a compelling reason to begin to get your words out there.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people it can feel like they're already behind. They're already, maybe that's because of their age, or because maybe they see someone else at their stage of life who's already 5 steps farther than them. They feel like, oh, I missed it on this one. I should have started this 5 years ago, 10 years ago. I don't know, whatever that feeling is, it's too late for me. But then you have this thing that's part of your manifesto as well. It says, when it comes to creativity and life with God, your pace is your pace, and there's no such thing as behind. Would you say more about that idea and how you feel so convicted about it?
Because I feel behind a lot, and I think reminding myself that really in the kingdom of God, there is no behind. And the reason why that is so powerful to me, I think Ian Morgan Cron, in one of his podcast episodes, he said it's never too late to do the next right thing, or to do the next thing, something like that. And of course that resonated with me. And I think when we look at our lives, as like we're getting somewhere, then we would have more tendency to feel behind or whatever. I don't think anybody ever feels ahead, but you definitely would measure yourself that way. But when we think of our lives as being right now, in this moment, it's a sort of a different realm of thinking. And that's the way I think God thinks about time. And if life is now, I can't be behind because I'm here right now. And so reminding myself that my pace is my pace, and how long things take me is how long things take me. And I am becoming someone. I'm not just creating something, but I'm becoming someone. And that is worth learning the spiritual discipline of waiting, and of learning what my own pace is. And that's part of the process and the curious journey of living life with God that can be really encouraging and also freeing in many ways.
Yeah, I love that. Your pace is your pace. I think so. We're competing against ourselves, our previous self, rather than someone out there in the world. And so often we get that mixed up, that it's about our own our own, keeping in our own lane with our eye on what we're going after rather than all the other things. Now, that said, there, of course, are things like Hope Writers, things like your book that are allowing us to get some skills and tools to put in our backpack for that journey. But it's our own pace and our own style and our own self that we need to do this with. I love that. Right. So, where can people find you? We've been talking around a lot of things that you have done or a lot of your work. Where, if people want to connect with you, they want to learn more about you, find your work, where will people do that?
Well, you can always find me at emilypfreeman.com. And also, I'm Emily P. Freeman pretty much everywhere, Instagram and also Twitter. I spend most time on Instagram because it's the most fun platform for me right now. I don't know, it has been for years, actually. So there I do stories and also try to post, weekly, daily sometimes. And also the Next Right Thing podcast.com is another place. And the book, you can find that all there too. So yeah, those are some places. Hope Writers is hopewriters.com. And then we also have an Instagram account there at Hope Writers.
Awesome. Well, yeah, people are definitely going to want to, if they don't already know you and follow you, which actually a lot of people in listening to this podcast, I think already do know of your work and have been impacted by it. So, but if they don't, then after today, they're for sure going to want to find more of you. So thank you so much for your time. And it's just been a great encouragement for the soul to talk to you.
I'm so glad. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Hey, thanks. I know you got to run. It's on to your next call, and I got to get back to my church work.
Very good. Thank you so much for having me. It's been super fun.
All right. Talk to you later. Bye.
See ya. Bye.
Well, thank you so much to Emily Freeman for that interview. It was so fun to chat with her and get to know her a little bit, and her book and all the show notes below are going to have information on where you can find her and where you can find her work. That was a great interview. But next week, we have two of the worship artists from The Belonging Co. out of Nashville, Tennessee. I'm super pumped. The Belonging Co. is a church that's basically, it started out of a prayer and worship night in Alex and Henry Seeley's basement. They'd moved from Australia to Nashville. They came from a large church context there and a worship ministry. And when they arrived in Nashville, they started this prayer and worship night that kind of grew out of their basement and into a church of now thousands of people that meet in Nashville. It's really an amazing move of God and work that he's doing in that church and in the city and even beyond that because of their worship ministry in particular. And so we're going to be talking to two of their worship artists and their worship pastor about songwriting and worship in the local church and the story of the Belonging Co. I think you're going to love that. So thanks again to our sponsor, Wycliffe College. Hey, they have an annual preaching day coming up. It's a conference on May 14th, right in the heart of Toronto. And this year, the conference on preaching is focusing on the book of John and the Gospels, how to preach the Gospels. So if that interests you, you can use the discount code WordMadeDigital for 10% off any of the events that Wycliffe is hosting right now. You can go to wycliffecollege.ca/WordMadeDigital for more information about that and more information about the school in general. All right, talk to you next week when we're back with The Belonging Co.
Thanks for listening to the Word Made Digital podcast with Joanna LaFleur. If you like this content, hit subscribe and share this episode with your friends. Head over to joannalafleur.com for more free tools, interviews, and media for creatives and communicators. We'd love to help you be the best you can be at communicating the best news in the world.